The corner office of our startup had always been my sanctuary, a place where dreams took shape against the backdrop of Seattle's perpetual rain. That Wednesday morning, watching drops trace patterns on the glass, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was profoundly wrong. The same instinct that had guided me through building Link Tech from the ground up was now screaming danger, and for once, I wished my intuition would fail me. I'm Luke Harrison, 43 years old, and until recently, I thought I understood the rules of success: work hard, trust your partners, and always maintain integrity. My wife Sophie often jokes that I'm too trusting for the cutthroat world of tech startups, but that trust had helped me build a team that felt more like family than colleagues. At least, that's what I believed until I noticed the discrepancies in our financial reports. The first red flag appeared during a routine meeting with our accounting team. Karen, our head accountant, mentioned an investment vehicle I'd never heard of, something called Vertex Holdings. The way she casually dropped it into conversation suggested she thought I was fully aware of its existence. I wasn't. My business partner, Kevin Matthews, had apparently signed off on it months ago. Luke. Sophie's voice cut through my brooding as she appeared in my office doorway. My wife's presence always brought a sense of calm, even in her crisp banking attire that reminded me she had her own professional battles to fight. You missed dinner last night. Again. I turned from the window, guilt mixing with the anxiety that had been my constant companion for days. I'm sorry, honey. These numbers, something's not adding up. I gestured to the stack of financial reports spread across my desk like evidence at a crime scene. Sophie crossed the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. As a senior risk analyst at First National, she had an eye for financial irregularities that made her both an invaluable confidant and, at times, an uncomfortably perceptive observer. She picked up one of the reports, her brow furrowing in that way that always preceded bad news. Luke, she said carefully, these investment patterns, they're similar to something we flagged at the bank last month. A company using subsidiary accounts to mask unauthorized fund transfers. She paused, choosing her words with precision. Have you talked to Kevin about this? Kevin Matthews. My partner, my friend of 15 years, the godfather to my children. The man who'd stood beside me when we were nothing but two guys with laptops and a dream of revolutionizing supply chain software. The thought that he might be involved in something questionable made my stomach turn. He's been avoiding me, I admitted, the words tasting bitter. Every time I try to schedule a meeting about the financials, he's suddenly got a client emergency or a family situation. Sophie's expression darkened. That's not a coincidence, Luke. You need to dash. A knock interrupted her, and Kevin himself appeared in the doorway, his usual confident smile in place. He looked every inch the successful tech entrepreneur in his tailored suit and designer glasses, but something about his expression seemed forced. Luke. Just the man I needed to see. His eyes flickered to Sophie, and I caught a momentary tension in his shoulders. Oh, Sophie, didn't expect to see you here. How's the banking world treating you? Interesting times, Sophie replied coolly. Always something new to discover. The emphasis she placed on discover wasn't subtle. Kevin's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Luke, we need to discuss the Morgan contract. Got a minute? I felt Sophie's hand squeeze my shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes. As she left, she gave Kevin a look that would have wilted a lesser man. I watched their interaction with new eyes, wondering how many other subtle warnings I'd missed over the past months. The Morgan contract? I prompted, once Sophie had gone. I thought that was finalized last week. Right, Kevin said, loosening his tie slightly. Actually, I wanted to discuss a potential new investor. Big money, Luke. The kind that could take us to the next level. As he launched into his pitch, my mind raced back through the past year, the delayed meetings, the redirected questions, the subtle shifts in our company's financial structure. I thought about the trust we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, and the growing mountain of evidence suggesting that my partner was playing a game I didn't yet understand. The rain continued its relentless pattern against the window, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice that sounded remarkably like Sophie's whispered, "The biggest betrayals always come wrapped in the package of trust." I looked at Kevin, really looked at him, and for the first time in our 15-year friendship, I saw a stranger. The documents lay before me like a roadmap of betrayal, each page revealing another layer of Kevin's carefully constructed deception. 3 a.m., and the office felt like a tomb, the only sound the hollow echo of my footsteps as I paced, trying to process what I discovered. The Vertex Holdings connection wasn't just an oversight, it was the tip of an iceberg that threatened to sink everything we'd built. I hadn't planned to stay this late, but after Kevin's earlier pitch about the mysterious new investor, something in his demeanor had kept nagging at me. The slight tremor in his hand as he pointed to projected profits, the way his eyes had skittered away when I'd asked about documentation. 15 years of friendship had taught me his tells, even if I'd been willfully blind to them lately. My office desk drawer had yielded the first piece of the puzzle, a misfiled contract that detailed a series of subsidiary companies, all leading back to a holding company registered in Kevin's wife's maiden name. The corporate veil was thin enough for someone who knew where to look, and Sophie's warning had given me the push I needed to start digging. The truth hit like a physical blow. Kevin had been using our company as a front, channeling investments through a maze of shell corporations that all led back to his personal accounts. The Morgan contract, our biggest deal to date, had been structured to siphon off 40% of the profits before they ever hit Linktecha's books. My hands shook as I pulled up our banking records on my laptop. The numbers danced before my eyes, each transaction now taking on new meaning. Quiet transfers, carefully timed to avoid scrutiny, had been bleeding us dry for months. The new investment Kevin had been pushing would have given him access to an even larger pool of funds to manipulate. The sound of footsteps in the hallway froze me in place. At this hour, the building should have been empty. "Burning the midnight oil, Luke." Kevin's voice carried a dangerous edge I'd never heard before. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette cast long by the corridor lights. Gone was the polished entrepreneur, replaced by something harder, colder. Or should I say, doing some amateur detective work. "How long?" The question burned in my throat. "How long have you been stealing from us?" He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with deliberate slowness. Stealing is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as correcting an imbalance. You've always been too cautious, too concerned with playing by the rules. Do you know how many opportunities we've missed because of your conservative approach? The rules exist for a reason, Kevin. Those opportunities you're talking about, they're called fraud. I gestured to the document spread across my desk. Vertex Holdings. The shell companies. You've been planning this from the start, haven't you? A smile spread across his face, but it never reached his eyes. You really want to do this, Luke? Think carefully about what happens next. You go public with this, and everything we've built comes crashing down. Every contract, every client relationship, gone. Is that what you want? What I want is my partner back. The man who used to talk about changing the world, not just lining his pockets. That man was a fool, Kevin spat. Wake up, Luke. This is business. There are no friends here, just opportunities and those smart enough to take them. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You expose this, and I'll make sure you go down with me. Every document, every decision we've ever made, I'll twist it until no one can tell where your negligence ended and my supposed fraud began. The threat hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of shattered trust. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what I should have seen years ago. The ambition that I'd admired in Kevin had curdled into something toxic, consuming everything in its path. You're bluffing, I said, but uncertainty crept into my voice. Kevin had always been the more aggressive one, the one who knew how to play hardball. How much evidence had he manufactured against me while building his house of cards? Try me. He picked up one of the documents from my desk, examining it with exaggerated casualness. By the way, how's Sophie enjoying her position at First National? It would be a shame if someone raised questions about insider trading, given her access to banking information and your, shall we say, recent interest in our company's financial structure. The implicit threat against Sophie made my blood run cold. Kevin had just crossed a line there was no coming back from. I watched him leave, his confident stride that of a man who thought he held all the cards. But he'd made a crucial mistake, he'd shown his hand too soon. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over Sophie's number. It was late, but I knew she'd want to hear this. As I stared at the screen, a text from her appeared, found something. Need to talk. Not over phone. The game had changed. Kevin thought he was playing chess, but he'd forgotten the most important rule of strategy: never underestimate your opponent's queen. Dawn painted Seattle's skyline in shades of betrayal, copper and steel, harsh and unforgiving. I sat in our kitchen, watching Sophie dissect the evidence we'd gathered, her analytical mind cutting through the emotional haze that had clouded mine for too long. The coffee between us had gone cold, forgotten in the weight of revelation. Every transaction, Sophie said, her voice carrying the quiet intensity I'd come to rely on, tells a story. Kevin's story is written in the spaces between the numbers, in the carefully crafted gaps where money disappears and reappears like a magician's trick. She spread the documents across our kitchen table, creating a mosaic of deception that made my throat tighten. The magnitude of Kevin's betrayal sat in my chest like lead, each breath a reminder of how thoroughly I'd been played. I trusted him with everything, I whispered, the words tasting of ash. 15 years of friendship, of building something together, and all this time he was looking for weaknesses to exploit. Sophie finished, her hand finding mine across the table. But that trust you gave so freely. It's not a weakness, Luke. It's what makes you different from him. It's why our clients believe in you, why our employees would follow you through fire. The morning light caught the silver at her temples, reminding me of all the battles we'd weathered together. Sophie had always been my compass, pointing true north when my own sense of direction faltered. Now, watching her methodically unravel Kevin's schemes, I saw not just my wife but a warrior strategist, her banking experience transforming into a weapon in our arsenal. The clients, I said suddenly, an idea taking shape. Kevin thinks he has them locked down, but he's forgotten something crucial. The relationships, the trust, that was never about the paperwork. It was about the midnight calls when their systems crashed, the weekends we spent troubleshooting, the personal guarantees I made. Sophie's eyes lit with understanding. And every one of those interactions is documented in your emails, your personal notes. The human side of business that Kevin could never quite grasp. But beneath our strategic planning, a deeper current of pain threatened to pull me under. I keep replaying every conversation, every decision we made together. How many times did he sit across from me, planning his next move while pretending to be my friend? How many family dinners, birthday celebrations, moments I thought were real? Stop, Sophie commanded, her tone gentler than the word suggested. That's exactly what he wants, to make you doubt everything, to paralyze you with second-guessing. The past is written, Luke. What matters now is how we write the next chapter. She was right, of course. The weight of betrayal could either crush me or forge me into something stronger. I thought of our team at Link Tech, the families that depended on us, the clients who had put their faith in our vision. Kevin had violated more than just our friendship, he'd threatened an entire ecosystem of trust and relationships. We need to be careful, I said, strategic thinking finally cutting through the emotional fog. Kevin's smart, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he knows exactly how I'll react, the hurt friend, the betrayed partner. He's expecting either a confrontation or a surrender. Sophie's smile held a predatory edge I'd rarely seen. Then let's give him exactly what he expects. Let him think he's won while we gather our resources. The best revenge isn't served cold, it served with precise timing and irrefutable evidence. We spent the next hours reaching out to loyal clients, careful not to reveal our hand but planting seeds of concern about recent structural changes. Each call felt like placing a piece on a chessboard, preparing for an endgame that Kevin couldn't see coming. The sun had climbed high when Sophie's phone buzzed. Her expression shifted as she read the message, a mix of triumph and concern that made my pulse quicken. "Remember that investment group Kevin's been pushing?" she said, looking up with eyes that held both victory and warning. "They're not just any investors. They're a front for something much bigger, and my contact at the SEC has been watching them for months." The revelation should have filled me with satisfaction, but instead, a chill ran down my spine. If Kevin was involved with people who had attracted SEC attention, we weren't just dealing with a betrayal anymore. We were walking into something far more dangerous. Sophie must have read the concern on my face. "Luke," she said softly, "there's something else you need to know. Something about Kevin's connection to First National that could change everything." The look in her eyes told me that whatever came next would test not just our strategy, but our very foundation. The game had just become infinitely more complex, and the stakes weren't just financial anymore, they were potentially lethal. The notification from our bank arrived like a digital guillotine, severing the last threads of my assumed reality. Our corporate accounts, every single one, had been drained. The numbers glared back at me from my phone screen, $0, repeated across every line like a verdict. In the gathering dusk of my office, the blue light from my device cast shadows that seemed to mock my previous certainty, my carefully laid plans. Kevin had moved faster than we'd anticipated, wielding financial instruments like weapons with a precision that left me breathless. Every safety net I thought we'd placed, every contingency we'd planned, had been cut through with surgical accuracy. The realization settled into my bones: this wasn't just betrayal anymore, this was annihilation. I watched our employees filing out for the day through my office window, their faces illuminated by the setting sun. Each one carried dreams, responsibilities, families that depended on the stability I'd promised them. Now those promises felt like ash in my mouth. How many of them would arrive tomorrow to find their professional lives upended? The weight of their unsuspecting trust pressed against my chest like a stone. The phone rang. "Sophie." My hand trembled as I reached for it, the events of the day having stripped away every layer of composure I'd maintained. "He's taken everything," I said before she could speak, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Every account, Sophie. Even the reserve funds we'd hidden." Somehow he knew. The silence on the other end stretched like a taut wire. When Sophie spoke, her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Luke, listen carefully. I'm looking at something that changes everything. Remember that SEC investigation I mentioned? It goes deeper than we thought. Kevin's not just running a personal scheme, he's part of a larger network. The money, it's not just gone, it's been moved. And I think I know where." But her revelation, which should have sparked hope, only intensified the hollow feeling expanding inside me. "It doesn't matter anymore," I said, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind Seattle's skyline. "By morning, we'll be in free fall. Payroll, operating expenses, client commitments, all of it due, with nothing to back it. He's won, Sophie. He's finally won." "That's not you talking," she snapped, her words cutting through my despair. "The Luke Harrison I married doesn't surrender. He plans, he fights, he finds a way. The Luke Harrison you married wasn't a fool who let his best friend destroy everything he built." "No," she said, her voice softening but maintaining its steel core. "The Luke Harrison I married understands that trust isn't weakness, it's courage. And right now, we need that courage more than ever." The truth of her words stirred something in me, a flicker of defiance in the darkness. I thought of Kevin sitting somewhere, probably celebrating his victory, imagining me broken and defeated. The image crystallized something inside me, not just anger, but a cold, clarifying fury that swept away the fog of self-pity. "Sophie," I said, an idea taking shape, "what exactly did you find about First National's connection to all this?" "It's complicated, and potentially explosive. Kevin's been working with someone inside the bank, someone high up. They've been orchestrating these types of takeovers across multiple companies. But they made a mistake with us. They left a trail, Luke. A trail that leads right to Dash." The line went dead. My heart stopped. I tried calling back, straight to voicemail. Again. Nothing. The office had grown dark, the city lights now casting long shadows across my desk. In that moment, the silence felt like a physical presence, heavy with implication. Sophie's words echoed in my mind, along with the memory of Kevin's threat about her position at the bank. The pieces began clicking together, forming a picture that turned my blood to ice. This wasn't just about money anymore. Kevin and his network hadn't just attacked our company, they'd made it personal in a way I hadn't imagined possible. And now Sophie, my brilliant, fearless Sophie, had stumbled onto something that made her a threat to people who solved their problems by making threats disappear. The hollow feeling in my chest transformed into something else entirely, a burning certainty that would either be my salvation or my destruction. Kevin thought he'd taken everything from me. But he'd forgotten the most fundamental law of human nature: a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous opponent of all. I reached for my phone one more time, not to call Sophie, but to dial a number I'd sworn never to use. It belonged to someone who operated in the shadows of Seattle's tech world, someone who owed me a favor I'd never collected. Until now. The line connected, and a gruff voice answered. Before doubt could take hold, I spoke the words that would set everything in motion: "It's time to call in that debt, Marcus. And I'm going to need everything you've got." The rain-slicked streets of Seattle's financial district reflected neon like spilled oil, beautiful and toxic. I stood in Marcus's underground office, surrounded by walls of servers humming with dark possibilities. Each screen before us told a different story of Kevin's betrayal: bank transfers, shell companies, encrypted communications. The digital breadcrumbs of a man who thought he'd covered every trace. "Your friend's good," Marcus said, his fingers dancing across keyboards, "but he's arrogant. Arrogant men leave patterns. They can't help themselves." The glow of monitors cast shadows across his scarred face, making him look more like an oracle than a disgraced tech mogul. "Look here, see how the money moves. It's like watching someone try to hide their footprints while wearing muddy boots." The patterns emerged before my eyes, each transaction a thread in a vast tapestry of deception. But it wasn't the money that held my attention, it was the timestamp on a particular series of transfers. The exact moment our accounts were drained coincided with Sophie's last call. The realization hit me with physical force: Kevin hadn't just anticipated our moves, he'd been watching us, listening, waiting. The hollow feeling in my chest transformed into something harder, crystalline in its clarity. Every moment of vulnerability I'd shown, every doubt I'd voiced, had been ammunition for his arsenal. "The SEC investigation Sophie mentioned," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "it wasn't just about financial fraud, was it? This goes higher, way higher." Marcus's silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who'd seen the darkest corners of corporate warfare. "Your wife stumbled onto something bigger than Kevin, bigger than LinkTech. There's a network of companies, all connected through First National. They target promising startups, drain them, then use the assets to fuel other operations. Some legal, some not so much." The pieces clicked together like tumblers in a lock. That's why Kevin pushed so hard for that new investment. It wasn't about growing LinkTech, it was about creating a legitimate front for their operation. "Smart man," Marcus nodded. "But your wife was smarter. She found the pattern at the bank, started pulling threads. That's when they moved against you both." The mention of Sophie sent a fresh wave of fear through me, but it was different now, focused, clarifying. I thought of her last words, cut off mid-revelation. Somewhere in this labyrinth of data was the key to finding her, to understanding what she'd discovered that was worth silencing. Show me everything about First National's involvement, I demanded. Every transaction, every connection, no matter how small. Hours blur together in Marcus's digital cave, each revelation building a clearer picture of the truth. Kevin wasn't just a trader, he was a small cog in a massive machine, one that had been running this scheme across multiple companies, multiple states. But machines, no matter how well-oiled, have weak points. There, Marcus said suddenly, pointing to a series of transactions. See these transfers? They're all routed through the same holding company before being dispersed. Standard practice for hiding money, but look at the registration dates. I leaned closer, and felt a smile spread across my face, the first genuine one since this nightmare began. The dates didn't align. In their haste to move against us, they'd made a crucial mistake in their paperwork. A small crack, but one that could bring down the entire facade. How quickly can you document all of this? I asked, already reaching for my phone. Give me an hour to package it properly. But Luke, Marcus's tone made me pause. What you're thinking of doing, it's going to make you some powerful enemies. I thought of Sophie, of our employees, of every person who trusted me to do the right thing. The old Luke would have hesitated, would have sought a safer path. But that Luke died the moment Kevin revealed his true nature. They became my enemies the moment they threatened my family, I said, conviction hardening my voice. Now it's time they learned what that means. I pulled up my contact list, scrolling to a name I hadn't used in years, Janet Chen, Senior Financial Crimes Prosecutor for the state of Washington. She'd once told me her door was always open if I needed help. Time to test that promise. As Marcus compiled the evidence, I drafted a message that would set our counterattack in motion. But this wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice, about protecting everything and everyone I held dear. Kevin and his network thought they were dealing with the same trusting fool they'd so easily manipulated. They were about to discover how profound their miscalculation had been. The rain continued its relentless rhythm against the windows, but now it sounded different, less like nature's lament and more like war drums, beating in time with my resolute heart. Tomorrow, when the sun rose over Seattle's skyline, it would illuminate a battlefield they never saw coming. The boardroom at First National Bank stretched before me like a gladiatorial arena, morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows to illuminate the faces of those gathered, board members, SEC investigators, and in the center of it all, Kevin. His usual smooth confidence had cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. The evidence we'd gathered lay before each person like a weapon, waiting to be wielded. Sophie sat beside Janet Chen, our ace prosecutor, her presence both a relief and a surge of pride that threatened to overwhelm me. They'd found her at a remote cabin owned by the bank's CEO, for her own protection, they claimed. The bruise on her wrist told a different story, one that made my blood simmer with barely contained rage. Mr. Harrison, the lead SEC investigator began, please proceed with your presentation. The familiar weight of my laptop felt different now as I connected it to the display system. This wasn't just another business presentation, it was the culmination of a journey that had stripped away every illusion I'd held about friendship, trust, and the nature of power itself. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying a steel edge that surprised even me. What you're about to see isn't just about financial fraud. It's about a systematic attempt to destroy companies from within, to turn legitimate businesses into fronts for something far more insidious. The evidence unfolded on the screen behind me, transaction logs, shell companies, encrypted communications. Each slide was another nail in the coffin of Kevin's carefully constructed scheme. I watched his face as the truth emerged, saw the moment he realized the depth of his miscalculation. You see, Kevin made 3 crucial mistakes, I continued, letting my gaze meet his directly. First, he assumed that trust was weakness. Second, he underestimated the power of genuine relationships. And third, I paused, allowing the weight of the moment to build. He threatened my family. Kevin's attempt at his usual dismissive smile faltered. This is ridiculous. Luke's obviously fabricated this evidence out of spite. A sad attempt to dash. The evidence, Janet Chen interrupted, has been independently verified by both our forensic team and the SEC. Would you like to explain the discrepancies in the holding company registration dates, Mr. Matthews? Or shall we discuss the offshore accounts linked to your wife's maiden name? The room temperature seemed to drop as the full scope of our investigation became clear. Board members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock to carefully contained anger. Kevin's network was unraveling thread by thread, and he knew it. You don't understand what you're doing, Kevin said, his voice low and dangerous as he looked at me. The people behind this, you have no idea what they're capable of. I let his threat hang in the air for a moment before responding. Actually, I do. That's why every piece of evidence in this presentation has already been sent to every major financial regulator and law enforcement agency in the country. There's no containing this anymore, Kevin. The truth has a way of demanding to be heard. The next hour passed in a blur of technical details and legal proceedings. I watched as Kevin's world collapsed around him, as the carefully constructed facade of success and power crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. But it wasn't until I saw the handcuffs close around his wrists that the reality truly hit me. Later, as Sophie and I stood in our office, our sanctuary restored, the setting sun painted Seattle's skyline in colors of redemption. Our employees had gathered in the main area, their faces showing relief and renewed purpose. The company would survive, stronger for having weathered this storm. What are you thinking? Sophie asked, her hand finding mine as we looked out over the city we'd almost lost. The question made me pause, considering the transformation of the past weeks. I'm thinking about trust, I said finally. Not the blind trust that Kevin exploited, but the kind that's earned through adversity. The kind that makes us stronger because we choose it with our eyes wide open. She squeezed my hand, understanding the deeper meaning behind my words. We'd lost something in this ordeal, a certain innocence about the world and the people in it. But we'd gained something far more valuable, an unshakable certainty in ourselves and each other. The office hummed with renewed energy behind us, our team already focused on rebuilding and moving forward. I thought about the lessons learned, the price paid for wisdom. Kevin had been right about one thing: business wasn't about friendship. But he'd been wrong about what it was about. It wasn't about power, or money, or even success. It was about creating something meaningful, something that could withstand the storms of betrayal and emerge stronger. It was about building connections that went deeper than profit margins and quarterly reports. As the last light faded from the sky, I looked at our reflection in the window, Sophie and me, standing together against the backdrop of the city we'd fought to protect. The man looking back at me was different from the one who'd first noticed those financial discrepancies so many weeks ago. Harder in some ways, yes, but also more complete, more certain of his place in the world. Kevin had tried to teach me that trust was weakness. Instead, he'd taught me its true nature, that real trust, the kind built on honesty and shared purpose, was the strongest force in the world. And that was a lesson worth every scar it had carved into my soul.